Yeah. So, as every time is, it's an interesting time to live. There's never been a time that's not been an interesting time to live. But sometimes you look forward, sometimes you look back, sometimes you try and figure out what's going on with the hair on your chin. So, the present. So, today I'm going to talk about the past. So, when I was about 15, my maternal grandmother, gave me my maternal grandfather's violins. He died when I was 6 months old, so I never really knew him. I mean, we'd met, but I don't remember this, right? Um, but I always knew about him growing up, and so I got his violins. He, he played violin. I knew he played violin on the radio in Cincinnati back in, I don't know, 40s or 50s, maybe the 30s. I'm not totally clear on the dates. Probably the 40s or 50s. Um, Early 40s, he was over in Germany, World War II. He was an army cook. Um, he had flat feet. By the way, at one point, I had access to his old army cookbooks. Very interesting. How to cook food for like an entire, I don't know what they call it, hundreds of soldiers, right? Um, the amounts, like the ingredients make sense. The amounts are a little crazy, but anyway, I digress. So, my grandmother gave me his violins, and he always played violin. I'll get into this. I had pictures of him, and I'll show those pictures when he was like 18, playing violin. So I have the violin that he first got as a teenager before he was 18. So this is like 1931. He was 18. This is the 1920s something. Imported by Kahn as a German trade violin. He went over when he was over in Germany. He bought another violin, brought that back. I have that. It's another German trade violin. I think he got duped because it says it was made in the 1700s, but it's like 1880s era reproduction of a more famous violin or whatever. I recently had these restored by, people that know how to work on violins. I work on instruments I'm not comfortable working on. I don't do things with, I've done a little bit with violins, but not my grandfather's violins. So anyway, I got the second one of my grandfather's violins back. I've had his bows restored. I live here around Austin, Texas. There's a really good lutherie shop, Austin Strings. They did all the work. They restored the bows. They did the work on the instruments. So super happy. But today I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about these instruments and kind of what they mean. Because I think the last episode and one before, because I'm kind of doing these ahead of time before I go on a vacation. So they're going to be released after I'm gone. So the exact order might be a little off. But talking about inspiration and what instruments mean to you. So I have a video that I did on gear and being inspired and value and all that. So having these instruments worked on was not cheap, right? I mean, so I think they're worth maybe $4,000 or $5,000. I don't care what they're worth. They were my grandfather's violins, and so I've probably spent about $3,000 at this point getting them, fixed up, and kind of to their playable and playing them. So these violins have not been played since, now, one of them I played later on. I did a little bit of work and kind of fixed it up myself, and but then it needed more work, so I left it alone. So, and that was probably 20 years ago. But for all practical intents purposes, they have not been played since 1973. March 14th, 1973 is when my grandfather died. So, happy side of the story, I have my grandfather's violins. I got them restored. I may as well deal with kind of the baggage here. So, my grandfather, he had some issues. He had a hair in his mouth from his mustache. No, that was me. He had a difficult marriage to my grandmother, my mother's So this is my mother's side of the family. He went through the war, saw a lot of stuff that left him kind of scarred. Difficult issues with his kids. His first child died as a toddler, not as an infant, but as a toddler. Next kid just left lots and lots and lots of issues in the wake. A difficult marriage. He finally kind of found happiness. He bought this little farmland, and then the government kind of bought it, eminent domain, and turned it into a recreational lake. So he had built his, ideal where I'm going to retire kind of farm on that land. So when that went through, he dismantled all the buildings, and everything else had gone on. He went into a garage. He sealed it off, turned on the car, and asphyxiated himself. So, and I always grew up knowing this. Like, there's not a time in my life that I didn't know that my grandfather killed himself, and kind of circumstances and all this other stuff, because people just talked about it when I was growing up. And it didn't help. My maternal grandmother hated men, so I got blamed for all kinds of stuff growing up. That was fun too, but we're not talking about that. So when I was about 15, my maternal grandmother, who just alternated between just like vitriol against men and just being the sweetest person you ever met, gave me his violins. Because I was playing guitar and I was interested in mandolin. I was interested in these other instruments. And I'd actually played violin for a little bit. So she gave me his violins. And so that was the only really tangible thing I had gotten from him. And going through the violin cases, like I found this Cincinnati streetcar ticket from 1953 where he had his set list handwritten down, which was really cool. So to give a little color, he grew up in Kentucky, and I have pictures of him, and I will post some of those pictures. In the 1930s, 1931 actually, with his friends, they called themselves the Bluegrass Revelers, and he played violin, but he could play kind of whatever instrument, but they all could. They grew up together, and they just kind of, played instruments, and that's what he did, because I don't think there's a whole lot to do. And so you just figure out something to do with your buddies, and that's what they did. They played music. Later on, he played on the radio in Cincinnati. I don't have a whole lot more detail than that. I know he played with Red Foley a little bit, who was a kind of a pop music, which country star in probably the 40s. I think it was after he came back from World War II. And he used to play at the Renfro Valley barn dances until my grandmother made him stop doing that. And so he played with, these violins. So again, I have the violin he first had when he was a teenager. And then I have a violin that he bought in Germany when World War II and he came back with. So these two violins are, the one was a Kahn branded one, but they imported them. They're German trade violins. And this was maybe mid-20s. For some reason, 1924 is sticking out in my head, but mid-20s. I think 1924 it might actually be on the sticker on that. And the other one is a reproduction of a 18th century violin, so it doesn't have the right date, but it's an 1880s instrument. And here's an interesting case in that, but I'll show you the violins. And I got the bows redone. I'm here in Austin, Texas. There's a really good place that, works with, restoring instruments. And I do work on instruments, but I'm not comfortable working on these violins, especially since they were my grandfather's. So Austin Strings, fantastic place. And that's where I had these made to be playable again, which they have not been played since 1973. So you're talking about fixing, glue joints that that aren't working anymore, moving the sound post, all kinds of things they did to make these playable. So awesome stuff. But yeah, they're worth the money. I think, between the 2 violins and 3 bows. I used to have a 4th bow, but my kid was horsing around with his friends and broke one of them. Probably about 20 years ago. So, whatever, that's the way the cookie crumbles. But I probably spent like $3,000 getting these redone. But we're talking about 100-plus-year-old instruments. I feel like I am responsible for maintaining them, and they belong to my grandfather. And this is pretty much the only thing I have from my grandfather, so that seemed worth it. And hearing them played, I'm not the best violin player. I'm not going to demonstrate them. I do play a little bit of violin. I played mandolin, so I know how to play the violin, but this is a fretless, and it's very different. And I did play violin when I was younger, and I can play these, but when I was in the shop and people that like know how to play violin were playing them, it was pretty profound. I'm not gonna lie. So we'll just stop here. I've rambled on a whole lot, so I'm gonna introduce you to my grandfather's violins. That's gonna be so yeah. Here we go. See you in a minute. Okay. Well, my hair's a mess. I've been doing a whole lot of this, and then when I do it in a video, it's like backwards, so I just made kind of a complete mess of it. I don't know. Looks like I'm making coleslaw or something. I don't know. Anyway, wow. I have my inner alfalfa is out. Anyway, I shall not be so vain. So yeah, I have my grandfather's violins. They have been purdied up. So this one, let's see if I can even see inside. I mean, it's German, all this stuff. It says like 1720, but it's not from 1720. It's from 1880. It's a German trade violin that's supposed to be a reproduction of an earlier maker. But it's pretty cool. It's got, I mean, you can see the age. It's got, some stuff in it, but it's still pretty, it's also highly out of tune right at the moment. But yeah, gorgeous. Look at that. Look at that back, right? And if you just do some tone tapping, I think I might have demonstrated this with my Eastman violin, which is not here for me to compare right now because it's actually at Austin Strings right now getting fixed. It had some other issues pop up, and so they're fixing them. But yeah, I mean, I have instruments that are 100 years old. This is bordering on 150 years old. Sounds good. I mean, it's been worked on. It's old, but it's had work, right? I think that's maybe a line about Hollywood celebrities or something. But yeah, it's pretty cool, when you can feel the age. I need to pull this one back and tune it a little bit, but I did use. To think if I use this at Eastman on a recent recording. I've been using some violins on some recent recordings with Rob the Bear. But anyway, so 1880s, you look at the wood, that kind of, striping the maple, nice European spruce top. This one, not as old, 1920s. So I think the picture that you probably see in the opening scene. It's my grandfather when he was 18, 1931, with the Bluegrass Revelers, holding the violin. It's this violin. So this is a special violin. This is one that just got finished up. It actually had a lot of damage to it. And so they got it playable and decent looking, but did not kind of diminish the age. They didn't restore it. This one's is also in tune at the moment. It sounds really good. They were imported by Kahn, and something Kahn Wonder Indiana. They imported from Germany. 1924 is the date on this. You look at the wood. It's a darker wood. Very much darker. So right hand is a older one. Left hand is a newer one. You can see they're a little bit darker. But the the older one looks a lot newer. You can tell this one has been through the trials. But this was my grandfather's first violin. Oh, I'm holding the wrong one. This was my grandfather's first violin. Recue the gravity music. Dun, dun, dun. This one was my grandfather's first violin. But yeah, it had a lot of damage. They kind of left it with the age. It's like a coin, right? A collector coin. You don't restore it. You keep what's there. And this has seen some times. I mean, this is a 100-year-old violin, so it doesn't need to look perfect. It doesn't look pretty, but this is my grandfather's first violin, and that's pretty inspiring to me, to pick up a bow and just hear a note and think there's a time where, even if I'm not playing as well as I'd like to, my grandfather was doing the same thing. This is the instrument he learned on. So that's a pretty powerful thing. If you can, attach to something that has that amount of meaning to somebody who, even though I didn't really know my grandfather, is meaningful to you, that's a huge part of what we do, right? It gives you a whole lot of sense of purpose. It gives you a whole lot of emotional import to what you're trying to say. And I am really looking forward to. I just brought this home today. I'm really looking forward to spending some time with this because it's truly special. So anyway, hope you enjoy this episode. I will chat with you later, and talk to you next time. So this last bit is specifically for Brianna at Austin Strings. She restored the bows that my grandfather had. I mentioned there were 3 out of 4. I've got 2 of them here in this room right now, so I'm going to look at them. Old German handmade bows. I don't know if they're 100 years old or if they're 150 years old. She redid them. There's one thing about having the instrument my grandfather used to play, and there's another about having the bow. And my primary instruments are guitar, banjo, mandolin, ukulele, and that. Picks are a dime a dozen. Bows are a totally different story. Bows are almost as important as the instrument. You can spend thousands of dollars on a bow, and she looked at these and said, these are old handmade German bows that are all at least 100 years old. They're worth restoring. And she was right. And yeah, holding in, if you've played violin, cello, or whatever, you understand there's this whole thing about the right hand. And the same thing is true with guitar, and that the right hand's important, but it's a whole nother level when you have a bow. And holding the bow that somebody important held, playing the instrument they held, that's kind of the trifecta. And so I'm really appreciative of that work. So anyway, thank you, Brianna. And yeah, can't thank you enough.